Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Lethal Weapon as well as the latest episode of Blindspot. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below and I include the time slots when I start talking about each of the respective shows. For example, if you want to hear what I have to say about Lethal Weapon, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Blindspot. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Lethal Weapon. A very interesting case this week. That basically essentially it deals with a guy that's on a motorcycle getting run off the road and basically killed in a hit. It's not really a hit and run, but basically he's hit and killed by someone in a car. And it turns out that this person, his GPS leads back to the doc, Doc Maureen's. This is actually the first episode I've ever caught her name. I don't know if they've ever, her name's probably popped up on, her door or something like that, or, they've probably said it before, but this is the first time I've ever clearly caught her name, so... Yeah, I don't know. And it's a very lovely name, Maureen. I've never seen or heard that name before, so that's kind of interesting. Nevertheless, but basically it turns out she was dating this dude. Turns out apparently she has a stalker who is after her, and basically throughout the entire episode, he's going after different people. Like, obviously, the person she was dating at the time, her ex-husband, well, kind of somewhat still current husband because they're not officially divorced. Bradley, which I love how Riggs ended up saving him by he got pushed out in the road and a truck is coming and then he runs, dashes and he slides and shoots the truck and ends up causing it to kind of slow down. So that was pretty sweet. It's kind of sad that actually finding out the reason why they're kind of getting divorced. You kind of piece it together when she says, oh, because of Vegas. And she goes into it a little more deeply with Riggs, basically going the reason why is because he cheated on her. Not just once, more than once. And on occasion, he even lied about it. And it kind of left her in a state where she wasn't really ready to move on because she kind of had a little distrust of anyone. I mean, it's understandable. After being cheated on and lied to, you're just going to have... that's something that's not necessarily easy to just immediately get over. It's you're going to be distrustful of everyone, so it made her a little harder for her to date, which, to a certain degree, I guess you could look at, it's kind of something, her and Briggs kind of are similar in a sense in this episode, because obviously she lost someone that she cared about just like he did, and it was a case of, in her case, it was murder, the fact that she implanted herself in the case, actually, even though everyone was yo, you don't have to be a part of this, she just wanted to because it was just she's part of this world and everything, and she wants to do more. She doesn't want to just sit on the sidelines just while everything's happening. She wants to be able to help bring down the person that did this. I did one of the suspects they ended up bringing up early on. Obviously, there's a fellow psychiatrist, Ronald, that kind of helps her out because basically because she's part of the case and everything, she can't be looking into her own case files because she won't be able to be what's the word, I can't think of the word right now, objective. She so she wouldn't be in the right objective mindset to really be able to say this person or this person, because basically obviously with this kind of the way the person is oh, I'm watching you and stuff like that, and the way they're going after people the way they are, it kind of shows that, this person has some kind of infatuation with her, knows her well enough, so it has to be someone that was a patient. One of her patients is someone that Riggs and Roger visited. Dude's kind of got a bit of an anger issue, and he's talking about how much he wants Dr. Maureen dead and stuff like that. I love one of the first things he does is end up punching Roger in her throat and everything. And he, even for being a smaller dude, he's pretty tough. And ended up kind of kicking Roger and Riggs' ass a little bit. Took Roger using a weight to kind of block some of his punches and kind of knock him out. But even then, he still kept coming after them, and it had to literally end with them, kind of choke slamming him into a table and then, Riggs hog tying him to keep him calm. But at the beginning, the entire time, Maureen was kind of no, there's no way he did it, because it turns out the reason why is because, he's all talk, essentially. His talk is worse than his bite. So he's running his mouth off how much he wants her dead, that he would want her to kill her and everything. But because he was too embarrassed to admit the reason why his real alibi is that he's taking care of his mom, his Nana. I don't know. Nana might also refer to his grandmother or something, but I assume his mom. But either way, someone that he cares about very deeply. That's she's sick and everything, and it's he's supposed to be a big tough guy, and it's embarrassing to admit that you love your mom. It's there's nothing wrong with that, dude. You're dared to take care of your mom. It's a good thing to be proud of you. It means you're being a good son. That's all. I mean, that's how I look at it. But like I say, it was kind of different. It's interesting seeing her like. That's what just like I love the fact is that's what I love is finding out more about characters that you really get to know. Obviously, we're learning about her backstory, but also we got to see her in a more vulnerable state because usually it's in a situation of like, okay, she's there kind of listening to Riggs and trying to help him out, but this is kind of a situation where it's the reverse of she needs help, and it was just kind of an interesting take because there's always a character that you always see calm, cool, and collected, but now you see her a little frazzled and everything. I mean, granted, anyone, no matter how professional you try to be, will get frazzled under these circumstances. But then it turns out, I don't know, just interesting to see that different side of her. Just kind of like, you've always seen the professional side of her, now you see the personal side. I did like the fact is that a little pseudo date that her and Riggs had basically meant to kind of antagonize the stalkers, so they think like, oh, they're a real couple, and then come after them. A running kind of joke in the episode was like, oh, because he ended up finding out that basically Riggs ended up finding out Roger actually visited her. Like she actually has a file on Roger, and he's like, "Oh, so Roger's come to visit you in the past, huh? What was it all about?" Constantly asking Roger about it. Eventually, got an answer. Essentially, there was a case back in the day. I think specifically like 3 years ago is what they were saying that Roger and Avery were. I forgot, was it like a meth den or something like that? They got two of the guys, but one of the guys like caught them by surprise and had a gun to Avery's head. And, he was telling Roger to take the shot, but Roger was just too scared. He froze. Luckily, Avery was able to talk the dude down, but it's still a situation where, like, his partner's life was in danger. And he didn't act because he was afraid of his partner. He might mess up and hit his partner. So he talked about the fact that affected his life, not just in the partnership wise, but also his relationship with Trish, when it came to intimate times. So it's just kind of seeing that side of Roger too. Like even then, taking Roger's stories, like we're still not even, even though we spend so much time when we still don't have all there is to do, all to know about Roger's story. Same thing for Riggs too. There's a lot about both their past that we're both kind of slowly learning as time goes on. Which that kind of comes up later on in the episode when Roger has to take the shot. I do love what Rick says. Oh, yeah, he's like, "Yep, I'm the one." It's like, "Oh, good job for you taking that shot without hesitation." He's like, "Yep, I shot right through his hand." You were you aiming for his hand? I shot him right through his hand. So that was good. That was kind of an interesting twist, especially because it's like, at first I instinctually thought Ronald, because it was kind of like the therapist, because I was like, well, he's also a therapist too, so maybe in his warped mind he's like, oh, I'm looking out for you from one therapist to another. It's like, obviously we've had a past connection and everything because we've crossed paths and worked together before, especially when he's like, it's like, it's like, I was like, oh man, like that's crazy, and then he gets shot in the back. I was like, wait, I didn't see that coming. I was like, oh, the trainee, Bailey's new trainee, is actually the guy. His name is Jason. Like I said, that was kind of that. I mean, in retrospect, that sucks for Ronald. He was there in the whole circumstance of trying to be like, even at that end part there, being shot in the back and everything. He got framed and everything, and because it was like, oh, I can't let you go out there. There's the stalker might still be out there. I was like, oh, you're just playing. Oh yeah, trying to play the good guy. You're not even gonna let her leave. But it's like, no, he was actually legitimately trying to be a good guy. But the reason why Jason's so obsessed with her is like basically his wife left him, and basically he, Maureen was there to kind of help him with his job and everything. She was kind of there to kind of talk him through it, kind of ease him back, keep working to kind of keep himself going. But it's like, oh, I only kept going because you were there. So, and even talking to Riggs, being like, oh, you're gonna have to die because you can never be good enough for her. And you have Riggs being like, well, yeah, duh, like that's not even like a question. Of course, I'm not good enough for her. So. But I love the fact is that they were able to get there out of that the house in time, like break through the her glass windows, and then jump into her pool just as the place exploded. I mean, it's one of this is actually, because another episode, one or two episodes back, it did the same way, where like the killer, it was that kid punishing all those people. He ended up killing himself at the end, so it's kind of a similar circumstance. Still feel bad, I still feel real bad for Ronald because he's dead, and also he doesn't even get a proper burial because it's like probably a lot of his body got burned up in and out. So it's actually kind of morbid when you think about it. Now, I was about to make a reference, and then it's like, it's going to sully the episode if I make that reference something that would end up being more. But so I'm going to leave it at that. But another thing that came up was the fact is that, after what they went through and everything, you have Maureen being like, I can't be your therapist anymore. It's just the procedure of these things. I don't know how to interpret it, whether it's just, from a professional standpoint of like, oh, we went through such a traumatic thing together, that it might influence the fact is that I might not be very, once again, objective when it comes to your treatment, because I'll always be looking at you as the guy who helped save me and help me in my circumstance. So it's like, I'll recommend you a new therapist, which obviously you have Riggs not taking too well, because he's like, well, the fact that you sent me to that new therapist kind of got my set all in my head. It's like, oh, now I got to jump now. She's like, no, what are you doing? Come back inside, get from off the ledge and everything. He's like, well, I don't know what to do. He's all screwed up. That new therapist kind of screwed up my head and everything. All the good work you put forward to fix me, and he kind of already undone it in like 20 minutes. She's like, okay, if I promise to become your therapist again, will you come back inside? He's like, okay, I guess I will. I do. She uses a very interesting term, basically referring to him as an emotional terrorist. It's like, yeah, he kind of threatening people, get till he gets his way, and just that is not the best way to kind of get your way. But obviously, you can tell that like he won't admit it, necessarily. But it's just, because even she kind of was like, you miss our sessions, don't you? It's like, he does, because, yeah, he may not be the most open about things, and it's still a little hard for him, but his time with Maureen actually helps him, helps him make some realized things, and he just acts, he does, even though he acts like it's an annoyance, he's kind of, after talking to her and kind of getting to know her through this whole thing that's going down, he saw, just like the audience still has, he saw a different side of her, and so I guess it makes him kind of want to open up a little bit more to her, because it's like, just as much as Roger and the Murtaughs themselves, and just as a family in general, are a big part of his life, it seems like Maureen has easily become one, like Avery and Bailey have as well, and Cruz, just like all of them act as kind of like his anchors for life, essentially. So, of course, he's gotten accustomed to these certain anchors, and he's not willing to let them go. So, and then a slight note is the whole Rihanna aspect of the episode. Basically, she's keeping secrets, she's lying about where she's going and stuff like that. And then you have Trish and Roger being the more like protective parents, are like, oh, looking into this, calling her friends and everything. And I love the fact is that she flipped the script on him. It's like, oh, I'm so disappointed in you. How could you do that and stuff like that? And then even Roger's like, well, what the hell just happened? How did she do that? It's like, I love the fact is that she so effortlessly flipped the script on him like that. And it turns out the fact is that the reason why she did what she was doing, like she had a fake ID and everything, is because she's been DJing. But to get into certain places, she needs an ID, be obviously old enough. Which is kind of like, at first I was like, she's lying, isn't it? It's like, and it turns out, no, that's not the case. She really is really doing things that way. She is just DJing. She is working. She just kept all this because she felt like her parents would overreact and everything, wouldn't let her do what she needs to do. And it's like, well, they're very protective. But there's a situation where it's like, it's kind of easy because you kind of feel like it'd be the easiest way to do, especially in her case where she has very protective parents, especially very protective and very nosy parents. But, at the end of the day, the sentiment, and, they have the best of intention because they love their little girl. So I have a very nice little extra story kind of, part of the episode too, So overall, a very good episode. Because I will also admit, kind of tacking this on it, and kind of forgot to talk about it earlier since I brought up the whole Maureen situation about, getting a new therapist. I was wondering, like, oh, that's going to be interesting going forward. I figured it was going to be a situation where the guy has a new therapist for an episode or two, and then ends up kind of talking Maureen and then taking him back. But it's like, nope, immediately that was taken care of. So, it just would have been interesting to see how that would have really worked out going forward. But nevertheless, I'm kind of happy things. Don't like the way he went about doing it to get her back and everything, like I said. But still, I'm kind of happy that, like I said, the whole anchor situation. So I'm glad that he kind of has her back in his life to be there to help him do everything. And now moving on to this week's episode of Blindspot. So running through this episode, a big focus of this episode is figuring out the connection between Shepard as well as Kurt. It seems that back in the day, Kurt was kind of a bit of a troublemaker, that he would always constantly break out of school, try to get away from the school. It's like, oh, it's more of a prison than it is a school. And he wants to leave because he's like, oh, I want to get back to my sister. She's too young. She can't fend for herself. Because no one at that time really knew about his family dynamic. I guess in that particular time, it's like, it's something that wasn't always with Kurt. Like probably in his hometown and everything, people probably knew, but at that school, none of his teachers or anyone really knew about those circumstances. Because like a lot of people in town believe Kurt's dad was responsible for the whole Taylor Shaw situation, but at the same time, it's like it probably never went past that. So at his school, they probably didn't know under those circumstances because he's like, "Oh, my dad's a monster" and stuff like that. So he has to be there to protect her. But nevertheless, the guy was kind of like his name, Colonel Nix, is kind of like, he was trying to, he wanted, Kurt to be set on the right path. But it seems like the one that kind of convinced him turns out to be Shepard. Whether it's her real name or not, it seems like it might be because her military background is connected to it. Her name is Ellen Briggs. She's the one that talked him into keeping Kurt there, because basically she has a conversation with him. It's like, oh, what you need to do is take your power and do something with it. The fact of the matter is that being at the school will give you power. It'll be the first steps you need to getting the strength you need to do stuff like protect your sister and just do what's right, essentially. Kind of like the mentality she has now about basically Sandstorm being in the right. That basically it seems like at that point she was trying to set him down a path of trying to follow that, because it also seems like she basically funded his entire education, where he thought was like a grant or something he had gotten, like to pay for his schooling and stuff like that. It's like, no, the fact of the matter is it was her. She paid for it herself. She wanted him to grow and become the person he is. Even certain things later on, because basically Patterson ended up catching on this conversation, which I'll kind of get into Patterson's whole side of things in this episode, but ended up finding out there's a conversation that basically he was getting offered a position in DC, but Mayfair got a call from a guy, and this guy is connected to Shepard. He's the one that they're talking throughout the episode, and it turns out like, oh, he's the one that blocked Mayfair from giving him that job in DC. It's like, oh, let him stay in New York, kind of get a little more seasoned, find like kind of shape out the edges a little bit, make him into a finer agent type of situation. And Mayfair's like, okay, if you say so. Mayfair never said anything because it's like, oh, well, why let Kurt know he was so close to getting a good position, but then it kind of sandbagged for him. So that's kind of why she didn't say anything. But that means everything from his education to being like, basically in a sense, if you break it down, it's kind of like, it's something that Nas kind of brings up in conversation. Like the fact is that Kurt's a bit of a control freak, has everything kind of planned out and in control. And it's like to find out that your entire life has been concocted by someone else, that basically he was the puppet and Shepard was the puppeteer. And it seems like every aspect of his life, his education, being where he is, everything that he is because of Sandstorm and Shepard. Even the fact of being in New York, the whole reason why he's with Jane, it's because of that too. Because the fact is, Shepard didn't really she'd always saw that spark inside of Kurt, that anger inside of him, and the fact is of wanting to do what's right. She sees within him that basically if she could temper that anger of his and put it towards more aligning with her own goals, because she ends up seeing a little bit of herself within Kurt as well. And that's what this is really all about. Like even then, like even throughout the episode, we know more about their connections, but we don't know fully what her connection is to him, why she took such an interest in him, like what made her decide to pick him out of anybody. There's just so many other people that could probably fit the bill. Yet why Kurt? Why go after someone like him? Because the fact of the matter is, she raised Remy and Roman. That's kind of going to be something else I'll talk about a little later on too. But it's like she raised them to be the way they are. So why not try to find someone else? Like, why do you specifically need Kurt, and for what purpose? Because basically it's called part of something known as the Truman Protocol, which we heard the name, but don't have any idea what that's about. But yeah, the fact is that she's not willing. She wants Kurt to know, like, oh, there are sacrifices you have to make, that basically, because it's like, oh, I'm a terrorist and you're a terrorist and, I follow the rules. And she's like, that's the point. She doesn't limit herself to rules. She does whatever she needs to for the sake of the country. Like, because in her mind, everything she's doing is for the sake of the country, that she's trying to make it better. And the fact that sacrifices have to be made. She even went as far as killing that guy, like, because he was the one that was slipping Kurt information. It's like she couldn't take the chances that he might end up letting a lot of stuff slip. We don't even know if that Truman Protocol was something real, or was that just something he said? Like, did Shepard get to him first, or did Shepard just happen to be there and wait for both of them to return to his room to strike? I don't know. He did just suddenly was like, oh, let's kind of go somewhere more private and everything. So it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe that was kind of the whole plan, but Nevertheless, he is a dear friend to hers, yet she killed him just for the sake of, like, yeah, sacrifices have to be made. Kind of focuses on the situation of, like, why without hesitation, even though she claims to love Remy and Roman, like, if there's any sign of betrayal, she went out of her way. It was like, no, the moment she found out, she wanted to give Remy a shot, but the moment she found out Remy was going to betray her, she was going to kill Remy. More so than anything, have Roman kill her. But it's kind of like Roman and Remy are kind of dead to her because of that fact. Because even with their certain situations, like, Shepard is yet to bring up the fact it's like, oh, getting her son and daughter back. It's like, no, they betrayed her, so they dead to her. Because now it seems like she's completely cast him aside, and now more of her focus is, even more so now, is on Kurt. She's like, even in a different lifetime, we could have been family. Now, I don't know whether that's supposed to be like, yo, there was some kind of connection between her and his dad in the past, where she could have easily been his mom or something. But I don't know. Because obviously the whole mentality of like, oh, like, abuse of power is kind of a overall storyline in this episode too. It kind of brings everything together. It's because in this episode there was an FBI agent named Boyd who was basically doing a very illegal thing, essentially entrapment. He was basically setting these people up to become criminals so that he could bust them. Essentially, he saw basically they're farmers that are connected to this whole pipeline situation, that basically the pipeline would go through their farmland and it kind of jeopardized their way of living, the land that, them and their family kind of make money off of and, have lived on, so basically people who are very outspoken who may have, it comes, they may have never done anything bad, or maybe they would have, but essentially he had this guy kind of act as a CI and kind of like invoke things to kind of get kind of almost a domestic terrorist situation started. So those people who kind of might have been on the border of possibly doing something, were very outspoken, get them to do something, and then you can bust them, hence the whole entrapment situation. But it's like the fact is, Kurt was like, we don't roll like that, because the fact is he knew he was doing something wrong because he didn't put any information out there. Like, he set this all up, and because of it, the guy that was acting as a CI, Jarrett, got killed. There was basically a group of terrorists almost enacted their plan because of him. His need to like it's a situation where it's like, I get where your intentions were. You're trying to root out some evil before it could have a chance to manifest, because these people could have easily grown up and been like, oh yeah, like they could have let their rage boil and eventually turn into something. But it's like, you didn't give them a chance to not go down that route. They could have taken more peaceful routes, but it's like, you incited the fire. You basically brought them together. You created this terrorist group so that they would do terrorist things so that you can bust them. And that kind of coincides with the whole like abuse of power of like how the system works and everything, which obviously Kurt found out, was super pissed about, tried to take over this whole situation, but like it didn't really work out. Luckily they were able to stop everything, because without even having to he was able to talk. I think her name was Tess, like kind of the main one inciting all this. Like, he ended up kind of talking her down, because it's like, a soldier, that's what you are in this battle, a soldier. Like, yeah, people didn't listen to you and everything. I get that, but as a soldier, you have to do what's right, find better ways to do things. Like, you're doing what you're doing, it's just going to cause more problems for other people. You're going to hurt a lot of innocent people, and that basically, he didn't really say it, but essentially that shoots out waves. Those people that you hurt will have people in their lives that will be dramatically affected by too. It's kind of a thing that just kind of sparks more hurt down the road. So, but coinciding that with the whole Shepard's message, also with the whole Roman thing, because Roman's trying to figure out, he's looking at Shepard, he now puts a face to the name and everything. It's like, oh, this is our mom. And, brings up the question to Nas about the fact is that, it's like, oh, is she their mom? And she's like, well, there's no record saying that she actually is your mom, or that they're even going through the proper, like, that she went through the proper channels to adopt them. Because we know that she's not their biological mom, because she can't biologically have children. Because the question also comes up as to why she took them in. And I think that is kind of the main reason. It's because she can never have any children of her own. She wanted someone to love. But the sad thing is, it's like, did she really want children, or did she just want people that would be obedient to her? Because the fact is, Roman and Remy went through a lot and were kind of broken already a little bit because of their circumstances. So it's this... Was she looking for someone to fix and rebuild as proper soldiers, or was she trying to, obviously fill a hole in her own heart? I mean, it'd be either or could easily be both. But the point I was getting to is, like, he asked, about, like, the fact is he feels something towards her. Like he has this warm feeling inside of him anytime he looks at her, but it's like he hears all these terrible things that she's done, all the people she's hurt, all these terrorist things that she's done, and it kind of is like, if I feel this warm feeling toward her and she's a monster, what does that make me? And then it starts getting him questioning about, well, why does she do the things that she's doing? And then Jane kind of explains why she does what she does. It's like, oh, is she wrong? It's like, no, she's not wrong. There are people who abuse power. That is just how, like, I'm not saying it's the way things should be, but it's how things are in some cases. But it doesn't mean her way of dealing with it is the right way. I mean, but then he kind of uses Jane as an example. It's like, well, look at you. You work with the FBI and everything. I'm kind of locked up in here all the time. And even you're kind of forced to work with them. Did you have to be there at their beck and call, not say anything to anyone about certain things and just do things that you don't want to? But then Jane's sounding like, but I do all this because I want to. I want to do the right thing. But at the same time, it's kind of when it's like, he even kind of phrases it like, well, are you sure that it's not Shepard? You say that Shepard brainwashed us, but who's to say the FBI didn't do the same thing too? Because, you could look at it as like, oh, Shepard forced her morals and beliefs on them as kids. But who's to say that basically with a blank slate that the FBI didn't do the same thing to Jane? I mean, really, Jane became this way because she thought she knew who she was, and she just had an instinct inside of her to do the right thing. It's because, I mean, that's what, in her mind, being part of Sandstorm and everything, that's what she was doing the right thing anyway, so that's something that's always stuck with her, so. I don't know, it just brought up an interesting conversation about things. Really quickly, we found out some things about Patterson this episode. I brought that up earlier, and I was going to go back to. The fact is that Patterson was doing things a little illegally in this episode. Apparently, she was using the NSA's Omaha project. Basically, it was kind of the whole daylight situation that Mayfair was kind of connected to and everything. Essentially, a program that, like, looks at everything and everybody, like, kind of spies on people without them realizing and using information without really telling them. That's how she got connected to this whole domestic terrorist situation with these farmers, how she ended up getting that recording of Mayfair and that guy. And it's like, yeah, it's a very powerful tool and everything, but the fact of the matter, it's not the right way. It's kind of like the fact is, they're fighting against these people who are trying to prove that, like, oh, they're fighting to prove that, like, oh, there's an abuse of power in the system and that the system has to be destroyed and rebuilt in a way that kind of, so, like, rebuilt from the ground up. And it's like, essentially them, like Boyd as well as Patterson doing what they're doing, is kind of proving the point that there's, an abuse of power. And Kurt is a very by the rules book type of guy, and it's like, no, yes, it might be the fastest way, but it doesn't make it the right way. Kind of going back to the conversation he had with Tess in that regard. So, Omaha can help them out, sure, but it's not the right way to go about taking down someone like Sandstorm. It's kind of something I've kind of brought up in kind of another recording, that basically, like, you don't have to kind of go about the same tactics as someone else not playing by the rules, because it's like, you work for this system, people believe in this system and everything, and it's like, if you kind of step outside that boundary, it's like you're jeopardizing not only your own beliefs, but the beliefs of all the people who believe in you and the system too. So, you see Patterson working herself really hard, because it's not just about stopping Shepard. More so than anything, sadly, it comes down to Borden, the man who betrayed her, that she had feelings for and everything. And she feels so much anger towards him that she wants to, no matter what the case may be, she wants to track them down. Because anytime she's like, oh yeah, track down Shepard, she never was like, oh, Sansom, but it's always Shepard and Borden, like Borden. That's what her main focus is on. It's what keeps her motivated. It keeps her driving. Like, she doesn't even want to take time to rest or whatever, even to the point she ends up passing out in the episode. Now, something that was recently that just popped in my head while I was recording this and everything, what if we end up finding out that Patterson's actually pregnant? That could be obviously it could be whatever, because I mean, if it seemed like she was doing okay, like there were signs that maybe there was something else going on, because like when she originally figured out that what was it, the leopard tattoo or whatever on Jane's neck was because she ended up dropping those pills. I thought something was kind of off there, the reason why she dropped the pills and everything, but it's like, oh man, but then I was like, oh, maybe, because that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to happen like that for that particular reason. So it's just a lucky accident, but maybe I'm thinking maybe there's more to it. But what if she is pregnant? That would definitely complicate things heavily for her, because it's like, oh crap, now like my child's dad is a terrorist. He's a very bad guy. He manipulated and used me. Bears out the question, like, would you keep the child? Should you, will she even want to keep the child that's a constant reminder of boredom type, So I don't know. It could easily be something else because it could be from what Shepard did to her, puncturing her eardrum and everything, just everything she went through. Or maybe it is purely from the fact is that she's not resting because she's so motivated to track down boredom. She hasn't been eating, sleeping, or anything, She's running her body down, so. And then another note in this episode is the whole Reed and Nikki situation. Just like I said it last episode, I was like, oh no, don't do it. Why? Because I knew things were going to get complicated. Not complicated to the extent that it got into this episode, apparently, with the whole like him, like she's doing drugs and he's like, well, isn't that the same thing you got on Freddie about? She's like, well, Freddie was out of control. It's like all about having a little bit of fun, and he's sitting there taking a hit too. I was like, Reed, don't tell her to get out. Tell her to get out. Oh God, no. Because to him, because for Reed, this is all about his way of kind of dealing with the whole Jones situation. He's saying that he's 100% okay with it, but I think being with her is a reminder because it's like, oh, she was Freddie's ex, and at the same time, Freddie's just a reminder of what went down with Jones, like what Jones did to them, but also what they did with Jones, like Freddie killing him and then Reed kind of covering for him, getting him out of town. Part of me was always thinking like, oh, what's going to happen is the fact is that Freddie's going to come back to town, like even though he's not supposed to find out about Nikki and Reed, and it kind of just straight up complicates things. But it was kind of a conversation that he had with Tasha, because Tasha's like, oh, are you okay about this whole Jones situation? He's like, Jones is dead, I don't have to worry about it. But she's like, no, the fact is you could talk to me, or at the very least you need to talk to someone about it. He's like, no, it's fine. And she apologizes later on in the episode, like, oh, I'm sorry, I kind of overstepped my boundaries. But it's like, no, she cares about him. And it's like, obviously she knows there's a girl and everything. She's like, oh, but don't kind of, ruin your fun. Like, if it's fun, go for it. At the end of the day, she kind of wants him to be happy. It's like, if you want him to be happy, tell him how you really feel. You shut him down and everything, but obviously you got feelings for him. But once again, it's a situation where it's like, I get it. You don't want to jeopardize your relationship with him, like your friendship. That's your best friend, and it would just complicate things. But you could tell she's trying so hard to be casual, like especially the first episode after that whole situation. She's like, so you're not going to try and kiss me again or whatever. Obviously there was a little awkwardness, and she's like, oh, did you go out with that late? How did things turn out between you and the girl at the bar? Like, she's trying too hard, and it breaks your heart a little bit seeing how hard she's trying. Almost completely forgot about the fact is that Jane's kind of doing the same thing too. She's dating, I can't even remember dude's name. He's the dude that she met on the cover, kind of had feelings for and everything, but then things kind of turned a little, well, she kind of kept her distance, but now, like, she's kind of taking that step forward. He's like, oh, kind of like, oh, let's go on more dates and everything, kind of basically cementing the fact that, hey, gotta put a little more commitment towards this, because I guess it was born from the whole situation with Roman being like, oh, do you do anything for yourself? Has there ever been anything that you've done for yourself? I mean, I was at the time I was thinking like, oh, is she gonna think? Obviously she's not gonna say it, but is she gonna think about the whole what happens to Roman? Did she do that for herself? But granted, you could argue she did partly for herself because she wanted her brother to kind of be free of his demons and stuff like that. But more so than anything, she did it for him so he'd have a second chance. So this is kind of something that she's like, this is my own personal life, because outside of the FBI, she doesn't actually have much of a personal life. So. Something I've thought about too, and I mean, maybe it's still in effect, but it's not as a big of a thing as it was in season 1. It's like her being at a safe house and having guards and everything. I don't remember if that's really been reestablished or not subsequently this season. Maybe it has and I didn't catch it. At least it doesn't seem like that's necessarily a thing anymore. So not unless she's staying at the FBI building, because I don't know where she's actually living in her free time. So that was just kind of interesting. I feel like she probably stays in the FBI excuse me, HQ, just so she can be closer to Roman, just in case, something happens or they need to talk or something. So overall, just a very good episode. Very interested to see the developments going forward, especially this whole Reed situation. You definitely know that's going to interfere with his job. Like, something's going to happen and he's not going to be focused because he's too high. And it's just, I don't know, man. It's just sad that things are taking this turn. It's like, I wish Reed had been like, nah, I'm not going to. But like I said, this is probably him trying to deal with the whole Jones situation. He acting like he's okay when he's not. I mean, normally he would have someone to talk to, Borden, but I mean, that's no longer possible. So then finding out what's up with Patterson. Then what's the real connection between Kurt and Shepard? Because obviously this is the tip of the iceberg. It's just, why is he so important to them and their plan to the point that they needed to include, because he wasn't originally part of the plan. It wasn't until until Remy had come up with the whole tattoo plan that at that moment is when Shepard decided to add Kurt into it. So we will just have to see, wait and see. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.